Hi friend, Niclas here from Your Audio Solutions. Hope you are doing well and welcome to today's episode. On the show today, we have recording and mastering engineer Pete Doell. He has worked with artists such as Miles Davis, Toto, the Beach Boys, and many others. He used to be a staff engineer at Capitol Studios, but is now a senior mastering engineer at AfterMaster Audio Labs, also in Los Angeles. Now, Pete also hosts a very popular audio lunch, which is a sort of a networking event in Los Angeles where producers and engineers come to meet, and you can usually find some legends hanging around there too. So, if you ever get a chance to get invited to one of these events, you should definitely go. It was a pleasure talking to Pete and be able to pick his brain on mastering, talk about music, recording, AI, and much more. And I hope you will love the conversation as well. Now, do you want exclusive access to interviews before the public? Do you want to be a part of the conversation? Do you want to be able to ask questions to up and coming guests, such as Pete, for example? Then all you have to do is to join the Audio Tribe. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's free to join, of course. All you have to do is enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe. I'd love to see you there, so just hit the link, enter your details, and you're in. Also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are consuming this podcast. But that's it. Let's get into the conversation with Pete Doell. But yeah, Peter, pleasure to have you here. I really appreciate you taking your time. I know you're a busy man.
Thank you for thinking of me.
Awesome. You told me in our early conversation that you also worked with Lee Sklar, right?
I used to be a staff engineer at Capitol Studios for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And, but nowadays for the last 17 years, I'm just a mastering engineer. So I don't see anybody. I'm like the lonely Maytag repairman.
Right.
I've been over the internet, goes out over the internet. But when I was a session engineer, I had the pleasure of working with people like Lee a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a legend.
And deservedly so. He's a tremendous human being, but a spectacular musician.
Yeah.
Definitely. One of my favorite lines is listening to a playback on in the control room. He would say stuff like, I don't mean to say that the vamp is too long, but when it started, I was clean shaven. But I'm fun.
Yeah. I mean, what was your experience? I don't want to make this about Lee necessarily, but what was your experience working with him? Because obviously, since he got so many gigs as a bass player, and I know you were a bass player, but what do you think separated him? Like, what got him so many gigs? I mean, in your perception.
Well, in addition to being, a dream of a person to have around, just beautiful energy and funny and all that, but he had among the best combinations of pocket feel and melodic thing. And when I say melodic, I mean he's not a soloistic, virtuosic, showy kind of player.
Mm-hmm.
He really just finds the essence of a melody in the song, and he brings so much musicality to it without bringing too much attention to himself. Which is probably the mark of any and all studio musicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that they can lay in the weeds, and then when there's a couple of little parting of the clouds, they can find a little beautiful statement to make their presence felt and the recording more special. That's him in a nutshell, I think.
Right. I mean, that's always when you see a guy like that, that's always what gets your attention, I guess, because that's hard to find those moments and just making your voice heard when it should be, and then just stay away. Right.
For the time, well, I'm sure for many years, but I mean, I'm thinking back that quite often you'd have like combinations of players, like you'd have Lee playing with Russ Kunkel, and the drummer, and you'd have guys who knew each other so well that they knew, okay, well, this is your moment to shine, and this is mine, and you know what I mean. That they would they would have sort of a language and a secret handshake that
Right,
they
right,
would
right.
be able to share with one another, and they just intuitively know what to do and when
Mm,
the other guy, when to let the other guy either have their thing or to play together, which is even more special.
mm.
You know, so yeah, I miss those days being
Yeah.
in the room where players are making the magic happen. Here in mastering, when I find stuff that is like, oh my god, how did that get by?
Mm, mm, mm.
You can't do anything about it. It's because all the players have gone home. But
Exactly.
uh, on the sessions, being having a musical background made um, made made the day really a lot more fun because you could, if you heard a problem, you could
Mm,
address and get it fixed and make the record better
mm.
right at the outset.
Right. I mean, yeah, because obviously I'm a bit younger than you, so
I should
I
say.
I think I know I'm like this. I always think about, oh, I wonder how it was back in the days, and because me listening to older music, whatever you want to call it, that's always been resonating with me a lot more. I mean, there's obviously exceptions, these days too, but the music back then seems magical. Maybe that's the wrong word, but maybe because I wasn't born then. But what was your experience? Back then when there actually was, where you just said, players coming in, playing the music, and you capturing the experience. I mean, yeah, how was that for you?
Well, some of it was that there was a more of a carefree thing,
Hmm.
uh, and that you know you'd have musicians who played together a lot
Hmm.
and have uh, budgets
Hmm.
that would allow creativity. That people would often depend on. Like I don't know if you saw the Wrecking Crew movie.
No, I haven't.
The You're probably familiar with who the Wrecking Crew
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was,
Hmm.
right? And so a lot of the producers of that era, they would depend on this nucleus of musicians to bring the special sauce to an otherwise just the sketch of a song. Really, they
Hmm.
really just the chord changes and maybe a hint of the melody, and it's like, okay, guys, make this be fantastic,
Hmm.
and they could and they would. Um, I think today, because budgets aren't like that, uh, people don't have the latitude to, incorporate a bit of room for the magic to happen. You
Hmm.
really either have to have it really nailed down, really written out so that you get exactly what you think you need and want,
Hmm.
or you have to be satisfied with less because you don't have the time or the
Right.
money
Right.
to to work on a song like all day.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, 20, 30 years ago, to be a recording engineer, the producer would expect that you'd take 5 and 6 hours to get a snare drum sound.
Right. Right.
But then you do it in 5 or 6 minutes. Next,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, what was the experience? Coming up with your car, I guess, parking at Capitol Studios and walking into a session. Uh, yeah, what was that like back then? I mean, I get maybe it's the same these days. I don't know.
Well, Capitol is one of those places that's still,
Mm,
is still highly regarded, and it's part of it's because of the rooms and the
mm,
gear, and I'd like to think that it's still because the staffing there was so good. When I worked there were 3 or 4 of us as staff engineers, and if it was my client, I'd be the first engineer. If I didn't have a client, I would be your assistant for the day, right?
mm,
So guys would you get if you came to Capital, you got like a level of service that you were not going to be able to get at your average studio, shall we say, where the assistant is, um, much more apt to fill the role of coffee boy or
mm.
setting up the microphones, but he's not going to know all the secret places in the room to make sure you put the this there or hey, can I suggest that you try this microphone for this job? You'll probably enjoy it, or or to cover their back in a way, because you can empathize, because yesterday you were sitting in that chair. That's not the average thing. But the great thing about working at Capitol is the variety of stuff. I mean, I got to work on high profile records in like all kinds of genres. I got to the thrill of probably among the high watermarks thing is I got to record the Miles Davis Tutu album back there, and did George Benson and the Stray Cats and all sorts of different styles of music. Plus, we did feature films. We did episodic TV. We did like The Simpsons and Seventh Heaven, and a whole bunch of TV shows like with alarming. So you had quite an incredible variety of types of work and music and people. It was a great place to work.
Right.
And I think that there are that many, well, especially with the pandemic, production is really, really slowed down. Studios are not many studios are really actually able to do sessions anymore. You can do, like we have a recording studio here at AfterMaster where I work that is a famous studio in itself. It used to be the Graham Nash. It used to be the Crosby, Stills and Nash guys studio back 30 years ago. But for vocal overdubs or for mixing, where you only have a couple of people around, that you can do safely. But there aren't many studios open up that are big enough that you can have musicians socially distanced to safe play.
But how has the pandemic affected your line of work as a mastering engineer at all, or?
And it has. I'm busier now than I was 5 months ago.
Right.
And part of that, I'm sure, is because people aren't out touring or playing. They're staying home and making music. God only knows what's going to happen next year when they are out on the road or performing. That maybe I'll be starving next year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hopefully not.
No, but you see what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing is tilted a little bit this year for people who do post-production and whatnot than production.
But do you think, I don't know if you still do a lot of TV and stuff, do you? Or is it mainly music?
I don't know. The only thing I was doing, the TV show Empire,
right,
which has a lot of music in it, and on the show they'd probably do a 60, 90-second version of a song, and I would master the full 4-minute version or whatever, and it would go up into iTunes at the end of a month or at the end of the season. But before I came over here 4 years ago, I used to work at Universal Mastering, and we did The Voice for years, which is another thing, but we did that every week.
Right.
And it was a Bataan death march, for God's sakes. We'd be up all night Sunday night mastering the stuff because it had to be in iTunes at like 9 in the morning Monday morning, so that it could be live on when the show aired at 5 in the afternoon Pacific time.
Right. Well, what's the experience working in a situation like that where it is an all night thing and the music is somewhat I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, nowadays, with iTunes and stuff, these people, you must admit, they have a pretty short shelf life. They're a star for sometimes a matter of a week, sometimes a couple of years, but whatever. So they have to strike while the iron is hot and make while they can. So we used to really try to maximize what we could get from them. Now, a number of years ago, in the first couple of seasons of American Idol, I worked on, and that was crazy. But I think nowadays there's just so much variety of stuff that isn't really looked at. All these shows are all just pop music and just singers. The world needs more variety in these musical variety shows, I think.
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, I was talking something in a similar vein with Michael Beinhard. I'm sure you know him.
Oh, love him.
Yeah, and he has some really interesting thoughts. Like one of his thoughts are, for example, with the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. Like he thinks we should not having to have those as our idols still. He thinks there should be a new paradigm shift. There should be new artists that makes us take the thing forward. And there hasn't really been anyone that has done that, unfortunately. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like the
Well,
whole
I
pop
mean,
structure, I guess, being the same, that sort of thing.
well, I think part of that is possibly because now anybody can get their music out
Mm.
there. It was like we're talking 50 years ago, for God's sakes, where the pipeline to get your music out in front of people was very narrow, and you really had to have something special. Now it's
Mm.
kind of more dilute, wouldn't you think?
Mm.
That there's just so much stuff that it's hard to find something that really will lead the pack.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There is. I mean, what do you think we can do to change that situation as musicians, or what bands can do, even, and artists?
Gee, I don't have a good answer for that one.
Right.
Um, one thing I will say, that is something that is pervasive in our society. I don't know if it's true there, but it sure is over here. I bet you it's safe to say that it's worldwide.
Mm.
Is that expertise
Mm.
has gotten a bad rap
Right.
here in our country? People distrust science. They
Right. Right.
distrust
Right.
people who are, look at the crap that's going on with the pandemic here and
Mm.
our president.
Yeah.
And the same is true, when I go online and you see all these people espousing that people learn how to master themselves.
Mm.
Uh, all you need is this plugin, and away you go.
Mm.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
But I think a lot of it is justified to the extent that if what you're trying to do is to make your own music better and fit in the marketplace better, then that's probably fine.
Mm.
But there aren't that many opportunities or people who are even interested in becoming journeyman, engineers or producers, who want to go out and
Learn the craft.
know,
Yeah.
be able to go out and help other people make great art.
Mm. I
They
mean,
want to,
yeah. Do you think that's because information is so readily available these days? And
I think so. And
yeah.
also people aim lower.
Right. In which
You
way,
know,
by the way?
well, people don't. I think that people do want to be able to make a living,
Hmm.
and some people have delusions of getting their getting a ticket out of here by getting a hit record. I mean, nobody has delusions about getting a record deal anymore. I'm not sure those even exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's harder to really hit the big time, I would think,
Yeah.
now than it has ever been.
Definitely. I mean, it has. I mean, especially because people can, like you said, upload their own songs on Spotify, and that wasn't possible a few years ago. I mean, which is both good and bad, but I think you mentioned it. There's a lot of stuff to sort through before you find something that's really cool, And I don't know if
Right.
the record labels help with that, being sort of a gatekeeper or not.
Oh, I don't think the record labels do at all. Although,
Right.
now that they're getting the big chunk of change in the streaming universe,
Hmm.
they're much more willing to take a chance,
Right.
since they're not really taking a chance.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. But being a mastering engineer, which you've been for a few years, um, what are your thoughts on AI becoming, more and more of a player? I don't know if you can call it a player yet, but it's getting there, I guess. What are your thoughts on
Oh,
that?
absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. Our company, AfterMaster, they
Hmm.
actually have a automated mastering service
Right.
for $9.95 or something. They will automate your mix, and you get 4 flavors to choose from. I'm going to blow them what they're called, but one is like radio ready that has more compression and makes it loud, and then there's bass centric and vocal centric, and so there's like 4 flavors, and you get a sample of each of the 4, and if you like any one of them, you pay your $10 and you get all 4. Now, if you're doing a pop record and you obviously have a workstation, you can take, the vocal centric one and make the verses out of that one and make the choruses out of the radio ready, more compressed one. You know what I mean? And really, really make something. But I personally think that it's not quite there yet. It's not ours, but I mean that all of the automated ones are to your point that artificial intelligence will be able to really do something that sounds like a human being, who had some sensibilities about that kind of music would have done. I think that day is coming, and it's I'm going to be out of a job here, and I don't know. I think it's probably a couple of years away at the maximum.
But are you embracing it, or are you reluctant to it? How do you view that whole change coming?
Well, I'm fine. I don't feel threatened by it, but I don't think that there's any substitute for somebody who has expertise. Like I was intimating that there really is still room for experts. I mean, you don't want to go if you need a limb amputated. You don't want to go to somebody who's just figured it out by listening or watching a YouTube video, for God's sakes. You need somebody who spent one of the yards that used to be. You had to spend 10,000 hours at an endeavor to be called an expert at anything, right? And for those of us who have spent 10,000 hours doing A, B, or C, there's certainly good reason to trust them.
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, there's obviously that case, but let's say an AI can speed up that training. I guess that's the goal, I guess.
I would think so.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that they're going to need, people to sort of coach the algorithm to start with. And then, it's like the algorithm is your children.
Yeah.
Rather than something to be, to feel threatened by.
Yeah. I mean, because I think the whole discussion is really fascinating, because, whether you want it or not, AI is here to stay, and like you hinted at, it might take jobs away from people. It's not a fun thing to look forward to in a way, but if you can embrace it, like you said, I think that's the way to go.
Oh yeah, I mean it's inevitable, and if it makes for better music, which it certainly could, then bring it.
Yeah.
Right now, it's like, to me, it's like when people ask, well, what's the difference between the automated mastering and we call it the custom mastering when you have me do it, right? I like to say, well, it's the difference between 40 milliseconds and 40 years. But, because, like, for example, when I worked at Universal Mastering, we were, the gatekeeper to the plants. So I got to hear like basically every style of music and the stuff that was selling in that style, the most successful of examples of each of these styles of music that were in the marketplace over my mastering speakers. So I was actually having a great course in what, the good version of that style of music is going to sound.
Yeah.
And that, you can't imagine how important that is. Like I hear something and pretty quickly I can make a decision about maybe you should need this or that and go there.
Right.
Because I have the confidence of, like I say, what's in the marketplace for this style of music and how I can get there and eke out the best part of the performance that's in front of me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
I don't,
that's an
at the
awesome
moment,
experience. Yeah.
artificial intelligence has got a ways to go before they can do stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, but that must have been, yeah, really, really good training, like you said, and it's hard to beat that. And but do you think people like you are becoming less people like you in the industry, or how do you see it from your point of view?
People like me, meaning
That
old
yeah,
farts.
that like with your experience, having been, yeah, having done it for so long, do you think that's becoming
Yeah,
less?
it's funny. I've been doing this 17 years, and to me that sounds like a short time
Mm-hmm.
because I was a recording engineer and mixer for
Sure.
30 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's it's definitely changing,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like let's say I get asked a lot of the times by people who are asking, should I go to like a recording school and learn the craft that way?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it used to be that you tell them, look, what's more important is that you just get your feet in the door
Mm-hmm.
at a recording studio, be the floor sweeper, coffee boy or whatever, and learn the craft by sitting at the feet of people who are actually doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So those opportunities are kind of few and far between now. There's
Exactly.
so many less studios, number one,
Mm-hmm.
and so many fewer, veteran engineer mixers who are wandering around to various studios. Most of them have their own studios now, for mixers anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's hard to get um, something that's an alternative to watching YouTube or listening to um, webinars on the web, right?
Mm-hmm.
To learn this stuff. There's
Yeah.
really no substitute for hearing it, in an acoustically uh, designed space to really drive the point home. And to derive your own taste about what speaks to you sonically and what is a miss, right?
Mm.
So those, in that sense, the world has really changed.
Right. Yeah, it's a shame, because also here in London, obviously that's happening more and more with studios closing. Uh, Also because there's getting less and less bands, like bands who,
Oh, really?
yeah, like less and less bands who want to use a studio to record.
Ah,
Which I don't know how it is in LA, in California, or US as a general, in general sense. How is the band still a very prominent thing in the US, or is it more artist based? What's your experience?
I don't know. I'm not in the best position to answer that. Although
Right.
what I see coming through is more individual artists,
Mm-hmm.
or obviously with a band behind them or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a collection of musicians
Right.
making the ensemble and all that. But um, no, it's more front people, like you're saying, than
Mm-hmm.
than a band of five guys who go by one name, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not so much that anymore. You're right.
Mm. Yeah, it's a shame. So when a client comes to you and wants you to master their album or song, what's the first few things you do, to get the mastering going, so to speak? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, first off, let me point out that even before the pandemic, I hardly ever had human beings here.
Right.
Hardly ever.
Mm.
Nobody. It's like people want to stay away, which is fine because you get more done and it's cheaper. It's going to be better if you're not here
Mm.
because you'll be like my room is probably not unlike most mastering rooms where there's one really accurate spot to listen, and I'm already sitting in it.
Mm.
If you're sitting over there on the couch or over on that couch, it doesn't sound remotely the same. So,
Right, right, right.
if, back before the pandemic, if people wanted to show up, I'd say show up for the first song. We'll get it going. Then you sit in the driver's seat and
Mm.
you sign off on it, and then split, and I'll finish the rest of the project.
Right.
Um, but aside from that, there's the usual nuts and bolts of making sure what it is that the artist really is going to be doing. Is it just for just for digital delivery, Spotify and all that stuff, just for iTunes, and then there's mastered for iTunes. Do you know about that one? Which is a high resolution thing, which I don't really find all that terribly worthwhile. First off, there's some kinds of music you don't really want to hear a hi-fi version of.
Right.
A grunge record is why $1.99 to hear something that's even more, nervous feeling. But you get the deliverables out of the way. But like I say, the very first thing I do is I discern what the style of music is, what the good version of that style of music that's that I've heard and is back in my memory banks. How does this compare to that? And then there's the sonic thing. It's like the thing that most people err on if they're mixing in their bedroom studio or any kind of project studio is either there's too much or too little bass, or there's the voice is either too recessed or way separated from the track. So there's those kinds of immediate observations, and then I will assess whether or not this can be successfully turned into a great sounding master. My yardstick is that mastering can only improve your mix by one letter grade. So if you bring me a B+ mix, I can hopefully give you back an A+ master. You bring me a C- mix, you're not going to get necessarily the A+ master. So in some cases, the most judicious thing is to ask for a remix. If the vocal is, way off, or and this is not to mention just like something electrical, like where the whole center thing is over here. If the whole thing is like, you can rebalance it and pull stuff to the center. But if the kick, snare, and bass are up the middle, but the voice is, over here halfway left, I can't fix that. You need to go revisit your mix, stuff like that. But stylistically, the most important thing that I do, immediately is to make sure that this is in the ballpark for, what they were shooting for, and that the room that they were mixing in wasn't lying to them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if the artist tells you, "Oh, I want it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music," do you give them still one master, or do you do separate masters?
One size fits most.
Right. So what's your approach to that? Because that's something that's confusing me a bit, because you have all these numbers, you know them, the -14, some is -16, 12, I don't know what it is exactly, but or are they that important to align to, or what's your thoughts on that?
It's probably been 4 years, something like that, that, all these LUFS kind of yardsticks have been out there. And, I have a digital meter that tells me that stuff, but I very rarely look at it. I'm mostly, I don't know about you, but when I work, I have my monitor at a certain volume where I know what that sounds like, right? And the only other thing is dim. So I have it full up and dim. I never adjust the volume, so I don't fool myself. And that's something I learned years ago when mixing too, because obviously it's going to sound better if it's louder, right? So you don't touch that. So you have a reference all the time,
right?
Sitting in front of the same speakers every day, that really what you're hearing. So once I've gotten my reference going, only once that I can recall in 4 years has anyone ever challenged me saying, "Oh, this is too low," or just usually it's too hot. Because nowadays, thank God, the streaming services will turn shit down. So if you have a hyper compressed ultra loud thing, they turn it down, and guess what? It sounds puny
Right.
on these services. So it's great because you can now make sure your clients understand that, and that you're going to get a louder, more exciting, more musical product on there if you have it still be dynamic.
But then maybe I'm wrong here, but then sometimes I still find myself finding louder songs on Spotify than other songs. So how does that work if they turn it down? Oh, that's why I get confused.
Well, I'm confused hearing what you just said too.
Right. I mean,
I don't know.
because I'm sure there's songs that are louder still than others on Spotify. Or,
Sure. Well, there's electrical loudness, and then there's apparent loudness, right? And there's stuff. Are you saying that there's stuff that measures wildly different?
I haven't measured it actually. That's just purely
Well,
just listening on a low level.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, parent volume obviously has to do with the amount of compression and upward expansion. The latter, upward expansion, is the way you get detail within a mix without having to squash it and make those ugly, nasty sounding artifacts. But you do by clipping. So that's one way that mastering engineers get apparent volume without having to clip and make the ugly, stuff that makes your skin crawl to listen to.
Right. But so apparent volume, so that's RMS, or is that measured in anything else, or that's still the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's RMS, but it's mostly, like I say, it's hard to measure.
Right.
But it's not hard to perceive
Right.
with your ears. You
Right.
say, "Wow, it sounds louder," but as far as the meter movement, it isn't, because you're bringing up this low-level detail.
And that's what you refer to as upper expansion. Was that the word you used?
Upward, as
Upward.
opposed
Right.
down. You're bringing the lower-level stuff forward, and you're making more. You're revealing more stuff without having to,
Right.
push the loud stuff down so that to get a balance, right? You're bringing the lower stuff up,
That's cool.
and the way you do that, expansion, is if you get compression ratios that are less than 1, right? Typically compression is 1.5 to 1, 4 to 1, 10, whatever. But if you get compression ratios that are less than 1, then that actually is bringing it up.
Right.
So if you typically what you'll do is have that stuff going on in the background and then blend it in. A lot of people will do that.
Oh, so that actually means, yeah, you're getting essentially more by having it less than 1, I guess, on your ratio, so to speak.
Right.
That's pretty cool. I don't think I've ever come across that before. I'm gonna check it out in more detail.
That'll be $250.
Yeah. No worries.
Need a major credit card for that one.
Yeah.
But it's true. That's the other way to get apparent volume without crushing things.
But that should also increase the RMS, shouldn't it? Or only to a certain degree?
Like I say, I don't have a great answer for that, because I'm not really worried too much about the electric stuff. You got to worry about it when stuff starts overloading, because you're putting more. So I guess that it would be the RMS, that you're getting more juice going through the circuit, and you're potentially hitting a threshold where nasty things could happen.
Right.
But at least you're not starting by trying to get a gallon of water into a quart-sized bottle. You're bringing lower level stuff forward.
Right. Makes sense. But when it comes to your reference level, that's something that I've also been thinking about, because obviously you have 2 settings, you said, or 2 not like dim or not dim.
Two different monitor levels.
Yeah.
That's all.
But if something comes in quieter than you're usually used to hear coming out of your speakers, you then bring the material up from your computer, I guess, before it hits the hardware. That's how you do that process, I guess?
Well, gain sounds different no matter where you get it.
Mm.
So getting gain in the digital domain isn't going to sound like gain I get, like getting it at the converter, for example, or any place in the analog circuit. So depends on what sounds best to
Right.
get the level. Sometimes, if all you need is a little bit of gain, getting it coming out of the computer is the most neutral,
Mm.
right? But
Mm.
sometimes what you want is color, you know,
Mm.
um, because that kind of character imparts all sorts of wonderful musical things
Mm.
to the sound. So, like I say, somebody asked me the other day, how is it you can get 5 dB more gain or whatever than my mix? How do you get all that gain? Well, you don't get it all at one place,
Mm.
obviously. You have to layer it in and figure out, well, this sounds good. Oh, it sounded better. Saying, you have to fiddle around till you find where you can get the right amount of gain to add up to your target level
Mm.
without doing something nasty to the colors or the overall quality of the sound.
Mm.
In fact, obviously the goal is to make each incremental place that you're adding the gain be better.
Right. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool, fascinating thing about mastering. Uh, yeah, the work flow. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, and again, not so much being an expert, but the fact that I'm sitting in a room that that's tuned on speakers that sound spectacular, and the imaging in here is unbelievably wonderful. And so, like, it used to be when I worked at Universal, I thought I had a great system,
Hmm.
right? But like, you half dB here. Do I really even hear that? And here, a tenth of a dB. There's so much more resolution in here than I
Hmm.
had over there, and that was a spectacular room. But
Right.
in here, I got such a lucky thing
Hmm.
that it's I have this confidence
Hmm.
that when I do something and I think it sounds better, I know I'm not fooling myself.
Hmm.
And I never have anybody come to me and say, "Man, the bottom end sounds flabby, or it sounds mushy, or it's boomy, or no."
Hmm.
And I don't even have subwoofers in here.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's the perfect place to get that. Obviously, not only you save time, but you're confident in your decisions. That's the most
Yeah,
important thing. Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, what do you say to people who say you cannot hear, in your example, the point 0.1 dB of a move? Some people say you can. I believe I have felt difference when I've mixed and doing small moves and stuff like that. But what is your take on that whole thing?
Oh my minutia. I mean, obviously, in mastering, we're trying to do things that are subtle but make musical differences. Okay, like in the case of an album,
Hmm.
right? We'll master each song individually, and then when you put the sequence together, you might find that as this one ends and the next song starts, the beginning sounds wimpy or it sounds way too loud,
Hmm.
right? But at the chorus, like the voice and so forth, things sound uniform.
Hmm.
But you may have to like bring this up outro down or bring the intro to the next thing up, so that the flow is smooth and not jarring.
Hmm. Hmm.
And quite often you're shuffling stuff up by a couple of tenths, a quarter dB or something, or I'll put a gain ride on so that the the downbeat of the next one, the first verse might over 20 seconds might start high and come down a dB and a half over 20 seconds.
Hmm. Hmm.
That type of stuff.
Right. Right. Right.
We're doing all sorts of stuff after we've done the mastering um, to get the flow of so that it's like listening to a set of music at a performance,
Hmm.
so that it's all uniform, even though we've made each thing stand alone.
Hmm.
But when you put them together, you have to potentially, do a little massaging so that things sit together.
Right. Right. Right.
You,
Makes sense, man.
Yeah, but we
Definitely.
do it anyway. But
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, and rightfully so. But just getting to like work life balance might not be the most exciting of a topic, but for me, having been in the industry not super long, but for a few years, and obviously you've been in it way longer. I always wondered, and maybe because I am younger, I don't know what my past experience, whatever, but that the work life balance working in a studio is always it's tough, especially if you're starting out and you're not used to it. Uh, what's your point of view when it comes to that? Like, is it necessary to do the 16-hour days thing? I mean, why is that a thing? First of all, in the music industry, why is such a common thing to work? You know, you're
crazy.
yeah. Why is that a thing? I never really fully understood it.
Well, some of it, some people get into music uh, as escapism,
Hmm.
right? you know, you get absorbed in a thing that just totally takes over your spirit, and I can see that when you get into the studio and the creative juices get flowing,
Mm.
that you don't want to turn it off.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
But then there's a lot of things like deadlines.
Hmm.
I think the longest time that I was in a control room uninterrupted, I think was 54 hours
Mm.
without leaving the room.
Right.
You don't know. I worked on I worked on David Lee Roth's Skyscraper record with
Mm-hmm.
Steve Vai
Mm-hmm.
um, for 3 months,
Mm.
and uh, we were working 140 hours a week.
Mm.
That's 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months, and that's on the clock. That's not
Mm.
4 hours of sleep a day.
Mm. But how do
That
you how do you maintain a focus? Yeah, how do you
I
maintain a
did my
focus?
own name at the end of that.
Say it
And
again.
the musicians, you'd work
Right.
with the drummer for 8 or 10 hours, tag you it, and then here comes the bass player and
Mm.
Billy Sheehan, and then here comes Steve Vai. Who's Steve Vai? I see you have Frank Zappa behind you on your
Yeah, yeah,
bookcase.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Steve Vai was a Zappa protege, and the way he was taught to make records, you go to the studio for 3 hours, go home
mm.
for 3 hours, rinse and repeat.
Mm.
That's what you did,
Yeah.
right? But uh, nowadays, especially, I would think that working with inside a computer where all you have to do is save and close your session, and you come back the next day and open it up, and everything's kind of there. That's a certainly an easier way to pick up and start up again than if you're working on a large format analog console with
Sure.
lots of channels and have to reset and everything.
Mm.
Uh, but I think you're right. Nowadays, you also killing yourself doesn't do anybody any great service.
No.
You do need to have that work balance
Hmm.
thing.
I mean, because yeah, there's so from my experience so far. I mean, there's so much I've seen where you can tell some person might just be totally overworked, and you can see the destruction it can have.
Sure.
That's the awful part of it. But obviously, when the creative juices are flowing, yeah, of course you don't want to say stop.
Yeah.
um,
As a staff person, working at a studio, you don't have any choice.
mm,
It's the artists say we're done is when you're done.
mm, yeah. I mean, and I can understand that too. But it's just also a shame how it can be so destructive to a person's life as well, and just yeah, it can be hard to balance that, I guess. You know.
Well, back in the early days of my career, you know, like cocaine was
Hmm.
was rampant,
Yeah.
and people would just you know get into a blur and keep working, and then come back the next day and go, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's like, because as you get more tired, you obviously add more
Hmm.
top end to things to make you feel excited still.
Yeah.
So no, it was never a smart move.
No, no. I mean, do you see less of that these days, or is it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see, as I
Right,
was saying,
right,
I hardly see anybody.
right. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't think that people are doing anything as crazy as that anymore.
Hmm.
Well, and larger and that type of prevalence, shall we say? I'm sure there's plenty of people doing it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Of course. I mean,
but if
I
you
guess.
can if you can manage it and it does and not let it manage you, then
Go ahead.
rock.
I mean, yeah. I mean, especially going back. Did you ever work with Frank Zappa? That was no.
No, but I've been dealing with his son Dweezil lately.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, he was supposed
Brilliant.
to come on to the show as well. Actually, at some point. Still working on making it happen. But yeah, he's
He'd be worth
awesome.
your time. He's a sharp guy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's your experience working with Dweezil? It must be cool.
I've never actually worked with him.
Right, right.
He's got a project going on that is a platform
Hmm.
for independent artists and what do you call it? Music industry people, shall we say, engineers and producers,
Cool.
so that you can market yourself. And I'm gonna do a terrible job of
Right, right.
misrepresenting his idea, but he's got a platform that'll help artists manage their career and monetize and keep track of the money and do all sorts of things that make it's like a one-stop shop. It sounds really quite brilliant.
That's
He's a
cool,
sharp
man. Nice.
so get him to give you the details because like I say, I'm going to butcher it.
That's okay. I mean, yeah, I'll try to get that out of him. um, but I don't want to take too much more of your time. Just because I know where you work now, and I think I heard you said it's another interview I was listening to, and that's about clients. Obviously, getting clients, and if I understood it correctly, you guys also work consistently getting clients to your studio, right? Or did I get that wrong?
Myself, I'm frustrated because we try to do advertising and it rarely pays off.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'm busy just from word of mouth.
Right, right. Makes sense with your legacy. uh,
That,
yeah.
but but if you've been long enough, been around a while, and people, if stuff of yours is fortunate enough to get played and are on the air,
Hmm.
and social media too. People say good things about having heard your work.
Hmm.
That's, I mean, I'm sure probably way better than I that social media. If you're an ace at that, you can really help your career out.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I'm not too smart about social media either myself, but yeah, I think you're right.
Uh,
But I mean, when it comes to, obviously, because you've been in the industry for a few decades, if there's one thing you would pick out in terms of building relationships and nurture a career, what comes to mind then?
um, that's an interesting question, and I've been thinking about that actually very recently. In that,
Hmm.
uh, if you're kind to people,
Hmm.
uh, it can go a long way. And not only do you feel better about yourself,
Hmm.
but the clients feel, incredibly better about themselves and about working with you. I'll give you, for instance, like, as I think I mentioned,
Hmm.
I hardly ever have human beings come to the studio. The material comes in over the internet, it goes out over the internet, and in my email,
Hmm.
when I send them the link to their mastered files, you know, um, I used to have, kind of a standard, like a form letter kind
Right,
of
right,
thing.
right.
But, um, but now I always say something like good stuff, or, wow, you can practice your Grammy acceptance speech now, right?
Yeah,
Something just to have fun and to say something positive.
yeah. Hmm.
And not only does it, make people feel better that some professional knucklehead would say something kind about their music, that it makes them feel better about themselves, but they're going to come back again and
Hmm.
again, right?
Hmm.
And it makes you feel better, like that I didn't take this opportunity to say, what the hell what were you thinking about? And next time, send me something with some talent, or, or, rather than be critical. I mean, it is what it is. And, you think that you've done your best work to try and make it sound as good as it deserves, or hopefully even better. That taking a moment to be kind is really a great thing.
That's really good advice, man.
For all concerned, for the giver and the receiver. It's a good thing. That's my feeling, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, nice. I mean, that's a really good tip.
I wish I had learned that myself 30 years ago.
Right. I mean, did he used to get mad or just be cold?
Well, I've told people off before.
Right.
I won't elaborate, but suffice it to say, I burned a couple of bridges by telling people how I genuinely felt.
Right.
And where are you going with that? I mean, really, no. If I had anything to do over again, that's the type of stuff. It's like you don't win anything by being frank sometimes. You only make enemies sometimes by being frank. So change it and say something positive.
Nice. Yeah, good.
You'll feel better,
advice.
and they'll feel better.
Exactly. Yeah, good advice, man.
And then if it's just at the beginning of a business relationship, then you can say, what kind of speakers are you working on, or whatever. You can get more to the germane aspects rather than get on your high horse and make an enemy when you could have avoided doing that.
Yeah, really good advice. Yeah. But final question: Do you have a favorite failure? As in something.
Oh, I got a good one there.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I got to record the Miles Davis Tutu record. This is 1986. Yikes!
It's a great record. Yeah.
It is a great record, and Marcus Miller, who was a guy, I don't know if you know that name. He's a tremendous player and artist on his own right in these days. But he had played in Miles's live band for a while, and Tommy LaPuma, the late great, had got Marcus on the team to help produce this record, and he brought a cassette. This is back in the cassette era. Of some material that he wanted Miles to hear, right? So we were only in the studio to do one song that day. And he gave me a cassette. This is all these years ago. He gave me a cassette with some material on it, with a song on it that he wanted Miles to take home and listen to. And so I was making a copy of the cassette while we were working, and I didn't pay any attention to what got over. So instead of the one song you got over, the whole thing transferred 8 songs. He loved them all, Miles did. So because I fucked up the cassette transfer, instead of one day, I got 3 weeks of working with Miles Davis.
Yeah.
Fucked up his cassette.
Yeah. That's a perfect example, man.
Amen.
Yeah. When did random question, but when did Miles Davis pass away? Was that in the 80s or 90s? What was it?
Yeah, it was not that long. That record was 86. I would say 89, maybe.
Wow. Because I was surprised when I checked that record out of yours that I actually didn't know he made records in the 80s, actually. That was a surprise to me.
Oh, yeah. That was not, I think after Tutu was the first record he did for Warner Brothers, because he had been on Columbia for years and years.
Right.
And then they did another record that Marcus Miller also was involved with called Amandla. And I think that was the last record he did before he passed away.
Right. And it's crazy. I mean, I'm glad you got to work with him, man. That must have been...
Oh, me too. I'll tell you, the best thing was going out to dinner in those dates. I would go out with Tommy LaPuma, the producer, and Miles. The stories.
Yeah.
You just cannot imagine how great the freaking stories were.
Is it a story you could share that you remember?
No, that's way too long ago. I don't really.
Okay.
But I mean, I remember little bits of things, but like talking about like the jazz scene in LA in the 40s.
Mm.
What? Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York and, went to college and everything back east. And I always thought, oh, the East Coast has got the cool stuff.
Right.
And I didn't really know that much about the jazz scene on the West Coast, except, stuff from the 60s.
Mm.
But Miles would talk about, all this incredible stuff that was going on, a decade or more before that, right after the World War.
Mm.
Now, who knew? I had no idea.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's those moments, that really sticks with you, I guess. It's the feeling you remember of being, hearing those stories. That's awesome, man. That must be.
Another thing that jumps to my mind right now is that the first studio I worked at was a place called Wally Hyder's, which is a very famous place that had studios in San Francisco as well as down here. And the first record I got to work on, just moving out here, as the assistant, was an Eddie Money record, okay? And the producer was Tom Dowd.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Dowd, I had just moved here from Boston, where I was a jazz fan and played a lot of music there. But Tom Dowd produced like 2 John Coltrane records.
Right.
Okay, right. But which 2? Love Supreme and Giant Steps.
Right.
Arguably maybe the 2 most significant records in jazz, right? Certainly of Coltrane's career.
Sure.
And talking with Tom Dowd about these records was just amazing, because he'd say, well, Coltrane would play a whole thing over here, and he'd say, man, I wish I'd played it over there. So he would edit the stuff and move the shit around. And I said to him, man, I know guys in Boston who would slit their throats if they heard this story, because they've been, shedding these solos, for years, thinking that this is the most amazing. Well, but, all this behind the scenes stuff that we, professional music people do, it's to make the music better. We're not pulling the wool over somebody's eyes. We're trying to make it better. Right? And that's the same thing that what I like to think I do now.
Yeah, for sure.
We're not, doing chicanery and, making stuff. We're trying to fool the listener. We're trying to, make art sound better.
Yeah.
Music is medicine. We should make each other feel better with it.
Exactly, man. Well, Peter, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time.
And you.
Obviously. Really, some cool stories and insights and all that. So thank you for taking your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Pete, for coming on to the show. It was a pleasure talking to you, and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about the interview. If you have any suggestions of up and coming guests you'd like to see on the show. Really hard to say that sentence. But let me know in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe. Join the audio tribe. It's free. Just enter your name and email address to get exclusive access to interviews and much more. Hit subscribe to the YouTube channel and all that sort of good stuff. Love to have you here this week again. I will see you guys next week. So take care.